Hi, my name is Prometheus Pan, sometimes known as John Desist, but mostly I haven't been called John Desist in 15 or 20 years now. And basically I'm here to discuss a couple different things. But I thought I'd introduce myself first, kind of give people a sense of who I am and why I, of all people, would be talking about such things, and particularly why I can talk about such things with some degree of authority. So, I guess the first thing to say is that I have Asperger's syndrome, and that's on the autism spectrum. And basically what that means is that what are called mirror neurons in the brain, which most people utilize to sort of make sense of other people, don't really work quite that way for me. They work, instead of to make sense of other people, to mirror other people's emotional internal experience, they mirror instead kind of my own internal psychological experience. So, kind of have what's called, in some senses, some people call that a disability, but there are some advantages to it, and the chief advantage to it is that I can speed read. And I can speed read pretty fast. I'm not world-class speed reader. There are a lot of people out there who can definitely speed read a lot faster than me, but I can speed read a textbook in a single sitting, or about 8-10 hours. So I've read a lot of textbooks. When I was 9 and 10 years old, I kind of got on a textbook craze where I just read textbooks and textbooks and textbooks. And so I have a lot of information in my head kind of bouncing around, and I know a lot of stuff. In particular, what I was most interested in was religion, world religions, psychology, philosophy. And that's kind of what dominated sort of the center of my research and my studies, for the first few years there. But then I also, branched out and diversified into sociology, civil engineering, physics, metaphysics, energy science, ergonomics. So, I'm a pretty well-read guy. Now, depending on how you measure such things, and different people have different yardsticks, I've never really actually completed, serious college courses, at least in part because I found it to be boring. Oftentimes I find myself in arguments with teachers, or I find the material a little bit too simple for my taste, so I never really quite got through college. But I have a really large knowledge base, which is equal, really, in some senses, it's the approximate equivalent of a dozen, maybe 2 dozen PhDs. So I have a lot of information to make sense out of things. In particular, what helps me in making sense out of things more than most people is the information which I studied about formal conversational logic, psychology, diplomacy. So I in particularly studied things to kind of give me the ability to make sense of the world. Because of my disability, I needed extra information in order to make sense of what was going on with other people's communication and how they were relating to me and other people. So I kind of turned things around in the long run, and I ended up kind of with advantage instead of disadvantage, in that I ended up with a very large knowledge base, and I ended up actually kind of being able to understand people better than most people do because of my depth understanding of psychology and sociology and formal conversational logic. So that's, kind of who I am, and sort of an introduction to me. Don't really want to talk too much about myself, but at the same time I want to kind of explain where I'm coming from. So one of the things that I really studied a lot, and one of the things I'm very interested in and kind of feel the urge to speak up about, is energy. Basically, it's very simple and yet very complicated depending on how you look at it, but this is what I have to say, is that what we need to do, kind of each of us, and everybody, and the President, and the Congress, and the Senate, and anybody who's interested in the problem, we need to do what's called a cost-benefit analysis of each kind of energy, i.e. nuclear power, solar power, tidal power, wind power, fossil fuels, biofuels. What are the costs and what are the benefits of each of those potential forms of energies, and the entire field of different forms of energy that we can have or use. And there are a couple of main specific criteria by which you would evaluate those things. Now, the first is the simple cost-benefit analysis of economics, i.e., how much money does it cost, how much money do you have to spend in order to get a certain amount of energy. And that's pretty important, and in some sense is almost the most important thing in all of that. The question of how much is it going to cost for us to get that. But there are other criteria which some people might find equally important. For instance, the ecological impact of a given energy source would be another criteria. In other words, the fossil fuels, they have an ecological impact. You burn them, they get into the atmosphere, they get into the ocean, they get into the plants, they get into the animals, things start to die, we start having global warming. So there's an ecological impact to those things. And when you start talking about real renewable energies, it's kind of an interesting thing that even the best out there, the very, very best form of energy out there, really, is geothermal power. But even geothermal power does have an ecological footprint. It takes up space on the earth. It can't otherwise be used. The resources that go into building the plant have an ecological impact. The steel has, an ecological impact. So no matter how you go about deriving energy, there's some kind of ecological impact that's going to come out of that. So then, another criteria is what's called yield, or how much energy specifically you get for a certain amount of investment. For instance, you burn some coal and you get out, some amount of energy. You burn a similar amount of plutonium in a nuclear reactor and you get an enormous yield compared to the coal. Well, turns out that that's really also a very key factor, because when you talk about solar power, the problem with solar power is solar power, while being renewable, is very low yield. You don't get a lot of energy from your solar panel. So if you're looking to, say, run your computer off of a nice solar panel, yay big or something, that might work. But if you want to run your washer, your dryer, your dishwasher, or any kind of major electrical appliance, you're going to have a lot of solar panels. So then you look at something like, compared to those other fuels, well, how does, wind power? Well, wind power, you get a slightly higher yield, also a slightly higher cost for ecological impact. But so you get payoffs one direction or another, and depending on which criteria you use, the different forms of energy have different cost benefit